9 times the speed of sound.
Hey guys, welcome back to Project GLander. I'm getting my 2009 Mercedes GL320 X164 truck ready for some light off-roading duty slash overlanding by doing some long overdue maintenance on the motor, transmission, suspension, exhaust, that kind of stuff. In episode 1, I pulled the motor and transmission out of the truck because I decided this is going to be a lot easier to service most of the items that I had to do. And a couple of weeks into it, I can tell you that that was a good decision because of all of the items I had to take off and how painful that would have been if this unit was actually still in the truck. In episode 2, I stripped the motor down as far as I wanted to in order to access all of the maintenance items I want to do. And unfortunately, we discovered that the oil leak I was chasing did not come from the oil cooler seals, which have already been replaced. So somebody was already in the motor before me, and the previous owner probably spent thousands of dollars to do the service that I'm basically doing right now. Nonetheless, we left episode 2 with me trying to replace the timing chain guides and the timing chain tensioner on the motor. Now, I went ahead and did that offline because frankly, I couldn't find a very good manual to give you like a step-by-step how-to. So I had to sort of figure it out on my own with a little bit of trial and error. So I'm definitely not gonna show you all of the mistakes that I was doing while I was doing that. If you do have any questions, if you're about to tackle this job, do comment below. I'm more than happy to help with anything I can. We're picking up in episode 3 with the timing chain guides and tensioner done. So it's time to start closing the motor up and clean up this entire mess that this oil leak has basically left, including some of the issues that I've had with the engine mounts leaking gray goo, but we'll talk about it in a couple minutes. Lots of work to do. Let's go. Before I start closing this up, let's clean the front of the motor. While I'm waiting for some paint to dry, I want to show you guys something that always catches me off guard when I look at these OM642 motors, and that is the gray goo that the engine mounts are filled with. To be completely honest with you, I don't really know what the purpose of this is. I'm sure there's an explanation. It's probably got something to do with thermal expansion or vibration reduction or something like that. But the reality is what happens after a while is this gray goo that sits inside the motor mount here, this thing, this weirdness, doesn't stay in the motor mount. What it does is it actually leaks out of the mount and down onto the rest of the stuff that's sitting underneath it. So if you've never seen this, if you don't know about this, and you just kind of look under one of these motors, it may look like the engine just puked its guts. And you have this on both sides of the motor. You have this on the passenger side and on the driver's side on the other side. So if you're looking to buy a secondhand car, for example, and you take it for an inspection at a shop that's not necessarily used to these motors or familiar with these motors or what have you, and they see this stuff on the bottom, you're gonna get a pretty interesting report come back. And I've seen that happen before. I had a shop basically tell a buyer for this particular truck, actually, which is kind of funny, tell a buyer that the drivetrain is going to fail and explode and a whole lot of other stuff that actually had nothing to do with the reality of the actual car. Why they've done this, if you know, please comment below. I'm gonna try and clean this up because I'm sick and tired of having this gray stuff just kind of sitting all over the place on my motor. So I'm gonna try and get rid of as much as I can right now and put the mounts back up. And I've got new engine mounts actually ready to go, so we can actually start putting the motor back in place. Before I get the timing cover installed, I wanted to show you something that kind of stops you from taking it off and on. The balance shaft here actually rides on the inside of the cover right there. So the manual says that the engine has to be atop that center for you to be able to take the cover off, because what ends up happening is if the balance shaft is actually down here, this bit will prevent you from taking the cover off and you don't have enough play to remove it. So the same thing applies putting the cover back on. It has to be atop that center so that you can slide it on and put the bolts on. On the bottom, we've got 4 longer, but not as long, and 1 super long, which actually goes in there. New water pump. Driver's side valve cover. When installing the valve cover, keep in mind there's a couple of different lengths for the bolts, so don't get them mixed up. There's a specific sequence to tighten these bolts, and also the actual gasket requires about an hour before you can torque it down. So you finger tighten first, let it sit for about an hour, and then you torque it down. Pretty much the exact same process on the other side. And after a quick cleanup of the parts, and in no particular order, let's get these things installed. Aside from the motor, this vehicle suffers from 2 other sort of issues that I want to address with the entire assembly out of the car. The first thing is I have a leak in the power steering rack. And unfortunately, it's kind of hard to tell where it's coming from. You can just kind of see how messy everything really is. So the rack's got to go out. And today we're going to tackle just that. Now I've got a rebuild kit coming through. Interestingly enough, there was one available online for 25 bucks and one available online for $100. So I obviously ordered the cheap one. So let's see if the parts that I get are actually sufficient to rebuild this. Now with the assembly in the car, this is a little bit hard because the diff, which is right there, is actually obstructing everything, to be honest, because it's right between the rack head over there, whatever you want to call it, and the engine. With the assembly out of the car, as you can tell, I have lifted the motor up in the air, and I had to do that because I had to access the lower oil pan. So I've lifted the motor up, which gives me quite a lot of access to just undo the rack and maybe slide it out. On the R-Class, which actually blew its rack, I'm going to have to figure out how to do this in the car, and unfortunately, I'm pretty sure the diff is going to have to go. So with the motor up, I can actually get the rack out without any issues. But this right here is the driver's side bolt holding the rack in place. Now, as you can tell, this thing on the right, this thing is the diff, this is the bolt, and this is how far I can move it without removing the diff. So I think what I'm going to do is cut that bolt as opposed to actually disassembling the entire diff and making my life even harder. So I'm going to cut that bolt, and I'm going to replace it with a bolt going front to back with the nut sitting in the back, which I actually have enough space for. I can't believe I have to do this yet again on this car. This is pretty funny. And now we have to actually take this thing out of here. So let's see how it's going to play out. It's pretty free on this side. So the rack needs to come up. The mount is kind of in the way there. There we go. Okay, there we go. So we've got it out. Now we can rotate it. Keep an eye on the lines. Rotate it out this way, maybe. Wow, Jesus. This thing is actually pretty heavy. So we've got it freed up. So let's see. Can we twist it more? There it is. It's gonna be a lot of fun putting back together. The line is dripping oil everywhere. And a little more, a little more. There we go. That's it. And now it can actually come out this way. Out the front. Here we go. Wow. I mean, the rack out of the way, you can kind of see the mess that's back here. Damn. So all that gray stuff plus oil leaking from the rack. This is gross. Now for the power steering rack, like I was saying earlier, I don't really know where the leak is coming from exactly because everything is just so coated up in garbage that it's kind of really hard to tell. But it's around here somewhere, right? Whether it's the top seal here or the seal at the bottom, whether it's the, I'm guessing it's an O-ring at the back here, I don't really know. Now my original plan was to get this rack fixed up, basically clean it, reseal it, and put it back together. I ordered a kit online that kind of comes in with supposedly all the parts you need. Now this one was 25 bucks on Parts Avatar. It's a Gates power steering repair kit. I can put the number in the description below. But the thing is, I don't actually have instructions about how to rebuild the rack. And when I say I don't have instructions, it's generally fairly straightforward. You know, take it apart, replace the seals, put it back together. But there are a couple of things that you got to watch out for. Some of the videos that I've watched, you have to adjust the tension on a couple of things, torque values, that kind of stuff, so that you get the same performance out of the rebuild. And I do not have those. I have not seen a rebuild manual for this anywhere. So with that in mind, and considering the GL is my daily driver that's been now parked for, you know, the better part of about a month and a half, 2 months, and I need it back on the road, I actually went ahead and ordered a new power steering rack. I definitely wanted to get this rebuilt. I really did, but I just won't have a chance to do it for this one. Now, the cool thing is that this is the same rack that is used on the R class and the ML class, and the R class actually blew its up. So mine's been leaking, but on the R class it actually blew whatever CO and dumped all of its power steering fluid sort of everywhere on my driveway. Actually, my wife was really lucky because she pulled in the driveway and then just bleh, power steering failed. So what we're actually going to do is we are going to attempt to rebuild this, but we're going to end up using it in the R class. So actually what I'm going to do is rebuild this one, drop the one from the R class, put this one up. Now just FYI, the rebuild kit is 25 bucks. The actual new rack cost me close to about 700 by the time it showed up here. It's about 500 for the parts. I got it from Rock Auto, and it's another, you know, $100 in taxes, $100 in delivery. So if you do know how to rebuild this, or if you're able to, if you have a manual, please comment below, because I'm gonna have to do this job later on. I really don't want to spend another $700 on the R class. You know, I pick up these cars at, you know, a fairly low price, you know, trying to get a good deal. So spending $700 on a rack is not really my idea of a good deal. Nonetheless, let's unpack the new rack, because I think we're gonna have to match it up, move the lines over, and get the outer tie rods mounted on the new one. Oh man, this thing is gorgeous. Look at that. Brand new rack. Interestingly enough, on Rock Auto, you could buy a new rack for $500, or you could buy a rebuilt rack for $485 plus a $300 core charge. So for the extra $15, I don't have to ship this one back to them. This bit here has been updated, I guess, to set 2 separate fittings. And it also came with 2 little O-rings, which I'm going to take a wild guess are for the line here, which is probably what's leaking in my case. So let's get this off and fit it to the new rack. Yeah, so the two O-rings that I was talking about, looks like they are for these 2 lines. And strangely enough, it's entirely possible that they were actually leaking. The next thing is what we're trying to do is to match up the 2 rack positions so that we can just simply take off the tie rods and mount them to the rack. First thing I've done is measure the thread length here, because what I want to try and do is get the outer tie rod about as close as possible on the new rack as it was on the old rack. This will have to go through an alignment, there's no way about it, but at least I can get it close enough to allow me to drive to the center and not have to tow the car. So now that I've done this, let's get the outer rod out of the way. With the outer tie rod out of the way, we can actually line up the 2 racks. With the outer tie rod out of the way, we can actually line up the 2 racks and center them to make sure that everything goes back exactly where it's supposed to be. The most important piece-ish is the plastic guide here, which centers the steering shaft onto the rack. The new rack comes centered right out of the warehouse. The old rack needs to be centered, and to do that, what I've done is actually gone ahead and lined it up with the new one. But you can actually see up at the top here that the plastic piece, because I haven't moved this is exactly where it was, this is how it was on the car, actually centers itself up on the front and right there on the back. Okay, the rack installation is basically the reverse of the removal. So let's get it in as far as we can over here. Slide it in place. Watch out for all the boots and the lines, of course. There we go. Geez, this thing is heavy. It doesn't look like it would be, but... All right, so put it right into place here, right into place there, and that's about it, really. And that's the rack done. Not exactly the easiest thing in the world, but honestly, with the assembly out of the car, a lot simpler than actually pulling it from under the vehicle. The last thing I need to get out is the transfer case, because I have a bit of a whine. Now, it's not the common chain rattle that people are complaining about, you know, when your chain gets stretched and it starts knocking all over the place. But I have a whine when the car accelerates. It kind of feels like, how do I describe it? You know, when you're sitting in an airplane, you're about to take off, it kind of does the and I've had it since day one. It doesn't really cause anything. I haven't heard any actual, damage being caused, but it is a little annoying. So what I'm gonna do, because we're at 300,000 kilometers, I'm actually gonna pop this open. I ordered the kit. The kit's a bit pricey, it's $500, but it does come with the chain, all the bearings and everything else. So we're gonna get this refurbished, slap it back on. Honestly, it's so easy to do it with this out of the car. You just pop all of these, bolts out of here and basically just pull this right out. So hopefully I'm not gonna kill myself doing that. Oh, there it is. So we've got some guiding pins there, and the transfer case just comes right out. Oh man, with the transfer case out of the way, you can kind of see this. This looks like transmission fluid, but I'm not really sure what this is about. Honestly, I don't really know what it is. This looks like grease or dirt mixed in with transmission fluid, maybe? Oh man, this is not good news. Okay, we might have to keep going here. I might have to do a little extra work on this transmission, unfortunately. And on that rather messy note, I think it's time to finish episode 3 of Project GLander. We still have lots of work to do before we can start the engine. So episode 4 is gonna kick off with the rebuild of the transfer case. I've got the kit in, everything should be good to go. We also have to finish assembly of all of the engine components that are still missing. We've got the manifolds, injectors, turbo, exhaust, pass of the wiring harness, all that kind of stuff. So lots of work to do in episode 4, and hopefully I'll be able to put the engine in the car and maybe start it. I'm not gonna be able to finish everything because there's still quite a lot to do around the car before I'm happy with the final result, but at least we'll be able to get the engine started, hopefully. This is also a good time to wrap up the year. We're about 12 hours away from 2022. On a personal note, 2021's actually been an emotional roller coaster for me, from a ton of family issues, COVID, home renovations. Really the only consistent thing has been the endless number of projects that are basically sitting parked outside of my house that need to be finished. With all of the nonsense that's been going around the world, this has been a great year for the channel. By last count, we're about 20 viewers short of about 1,000 subscribers. So I just want to thank all of you guys for joining me on this trip. It's been a phenomenal year from a car project point of view. I spent a good 6 months plus working on W201 restoration project. I also spent a lot of time trying to diagnose and fix the oil pressure problem on my 2-liter turbo B8 Audi A4. And Project GLander has been the big one over the last couple of months, and this is what we're going to start 2022 with, because this engine has to run. This is my daily car, and I really, really need it back on the road. Frankly, my family has outgrown the A4, even in its Avant form, the station wagon. I need the truck back on the road. I really do. Now, 2022 is actually going to be a lot more exciting because there's a ton of stuff that still needs to get done. I already mentioned Project GLander. We need to wrap that up. The W201 restoration, we need to wrap that up. I've got a broken S4 4.2-liter V8 that's been sitting in the trailer for now 2 years. That needs to be basically rebuilt from scratch. So I need to build that engine and restore the car. I bought my wife a broken 2009 Mercedes ML 320, basically the exact same thing as the GLander. Car doesn't even run. I've got my dad's R-Class, same engine that blew a power steering rack. So like I mentioned earlier in the episode, that's going to be the first thing to get tackled right after Project GLander. I've got my Audi 80, the B4 station wagon that I raced at Targa. That needs to get finished. And just in case I run out of projects next year, I've got to do a diesel swap in my A4 B8 Avant, taking the CJAA motor out of my 2010 Volkswagen Golf. And I also have my B5 cage chassis that needs a motor and generally needs to be finished up so that I can either sell it or go race it. So thank you so much for your support. If you like what you see, click the thumbs up. If you're not currently subscribed, click subscribe. Hit the bell button so you can catch up on all of the videos as soon as they come out. And I wish you guys all of the best in 2022. I sure hope that it's going to be a lot better for all of us than 2021 really has been. Happy holidays, happy new year, and I will see you in January.